The Steam controller went up for sale and it sold out in 30 minutes. It sold so fast that it broke Steam's checkout. But if you're an engineer working in Steam's checkout, it actually could have been worse. Because by Valve's own timeline, the Steam machine and the Steam frame were also supposed to be on sale. Yet obviously, only the controller went up for sale. And Valve told us why via a statement made to Polygon. Quote, "This doesn't have RAM in it." Yeah, your controller doesn't have RAM. And that is Valve telling us, on the record, that they cannot escape the RAM crisis. Now, you may have heard that the RAM crisis was easing, seen headlines about RAM prices coming down, of data center projects being scrapped, maybe people thinking the worst is behind us. But Valve do not think so. They need you to understand why, and why the machine and the frame still are not here. And, perhaps more worryingly, what they're going to cost whenever they finally are here. And to begin with the happy bit, the Steam Controller Mark II launched. Gone are the 2015-era owl eye-shaped haptic trackpads on an inverted boomerang. In its place, we have a controller that's effectively a Steam Deck with no screen and a few upgrades. There's extra buttons, there's magnetic control sticks that should solve drift issues, gyro controls for natural cursor movement, and some lovely quality of life concessions with the Puck, which is a Bluetooth hub and charger. The reviews are almost universally positive, and the biggest complaints? Well, those are also the factors that have made this device more likely to succeed than the 2015 model. Which may sound confusing, but it does make sense. You see, it's because it relies so heavily on Steam Input, which is a really fantastic system within Steam, and it does make it so that this controller, Todd Howard guarantee, it just works with every game in your Steam library with no configuration needed. But there's a problem there. It does mean that using it for other games and PC is a bit trickier than general controllers, and the quality of the buttons and general feel are good, but they're a bit lackluster compared to expectations for, say, a $100 device. Because yes, this is a $100 controller, and that price is perhaps one of the biggest signs that Valve had to compromise to get this device out the door. And you don't have to take our word for it, because Valve have said it openly. Getting here was evidently not easy, and I think stuff's bad when even Valve are openly talking about problems and struggles. But first, there's a big gaming data breach you really need to be aware of. It actually impacted me and one of my editors. So Star Citizen just disclosed a breach, a quote, systemic and sophisticated attack. It involved player data being accessed, including names, emails, dates of birth, and Cloud Imperium sat on it for over a month before they told anyone. And that's just the latest. We even had a scare last year on Steam with 89 million records allegedly being leaked. So the pattern is clear. Your data gets out there, and when it does, data brokers gobble it up. There are companies whose entire business is buying and reselling your personal data. And once it's in that ecosystem, it circulates. And that is what today's sponsor, Incogni, deals with. You sign up. They then identify which brokers have your data. They send removal requests on your behalf, and they do this not one-off. They do it continuously. This saves you hours of paperwork because you do have a legal right to get that stuff taken down, but of course, actually using your legal right is just not something people will do because it's loads of manual work. So Incogni just handles all of it. And here's a look at my dashboard. 257 requests sent across 48 brokers, 250 completed, an average resolution time of 12 days, and 21 brokers actively being monitored to make sure my data stays down. And even just looking through the names of the brokers, man, some of them are real shady. So go to incogni.com/Bellular News. Use code Bellular News and you'll get 60% off an annual plan. And that is just at the link down below in the description. It's now time for the full quote. This doesn't have RAM in it, and it's not as complicated to start getting out the door for us. That's the full quote from Valve hardware engineer Steve Cardinale. Now, they could build up stock faster with this product than any of the other ones, meaning they can actually sell it to you, which does make sense given the component costs have been going up. But they also say that they haven't been waiting for the other machines in the first place, and this is where it starts to get more interesting. Designer Lawrence Yang told Rock Paper Shotgun that they, quote, wanted to dispel any rumors that we were intentionally holding back the Steam controller. That would be, of course, for sales parity with other devices. And he says that across firmware, hardware, and production quantity, they've actually achieved their goals and they can just get the controller out the door. But that there is one target that they admit they missed, and that's price. Obviously, $100 is not the most expensive controller in the market. There are $200+ ones. So it sits firmly mid-market in its pricing, which makes sense for a niche use case sort of enthusiast controller, but it still seems higher than what Valve wanted. it still seems to be a compromise. You see, Yang told PC Gamer that, quote, price has gone up from where we originally wanted it to be. And beyond even the base price, they also cited tariffs and import costs for variable international pricing as well. So, this controller, the one that we can actually get, may be the one that Valve could ship fastest, but that doesn't mean that it's been unaffected by the chaos of the markets lately. And that's a chaos that has been getting worse all the time, even as Valve gears up to launch devices that, unlike this controller, do actually have RAM in them. When we're talking about the Steam Machine, we know Valve isn't building the highest power, top-of-the-line device. Hands-on previews show 16 gigs of DDR5 memory with 8 gigs DDR6 VRAM for the GPU. Now, that should be fairly capable, especially with Valve's custom firmware solutions and the endless pile of optimization data from Steam to improve SteamOS. So yeah, performance-wise, it should be pretty good. But it also might have gotten them ahead of an impending market problem, as, of course, demand for memory continues to throttle every industry that possibly can use memory all at the same time. Now, let's get into that. As spotted by WCCF Tech, a Korean outlet called eDaily has reported that Samsung is ramping up its DDR6 production. And by ramping up, it's quadrupling. That's huge, and it would sound like good news. I mean, that's what's powering the memory of PlayStation, Xboxes, the last few generations of graphics cards, as an example. It's what's in the Steam Deck's GPU, but that is an increase that is not really for RAM that's going into those devices. It's probably not even for you. You see, production quadrupled for Tesla alone. And even with that, it's still 20% short of what Tesla asked for. What does Tesla need DDR6 RAM for? Well, quote, automotive, infotainment, and autonomous driving systems. Yeah, everyone who's building any kind of product that has RAM in it is of course competing for the same production cycles. And eDaily suggests that since last year, the price of 8 gigs of GDDR6 has nearly quadrupled. 4x, that's mad. Now, let's just stop and sit with that for a second, because that's the same type of memory that's going inside your modern consoles, costing almost 4x what it did a year ago, and it is still climbing. And as those prices increase, so do the prices of electrical components, chipboards, everything else that's needed to keep up with the rising demand for this type of thing from the world economy, of course, including the data centers. And that's why a RAM crisis can still impact a game controller's component costs, even if the game controller has no RAM inside, because a lot of this stuff is pretty commingled. Plus, even as the data centers are changing their demands for specific components, that actually doesn't mean things get better for you, and you should know that. Now, I don't bring this up, and I didn't try to, shit on the lower RAM pricing headlines just to make people feel bad. That would suck. It's to set expectations so you don't get, gutted, disappointed, and let down. As flagged by Tom's Hardware, Intel recently told their investors that they're expecting data center systems to move from being GPU-weighted to being equally split between GPUs and CPUs. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that GPU demand will drop. It could just mean that CPU demand will increase. And just so you understand what that means, in the data center, yes, it is true that the, say, large language model or whatever it is, inference, that is a thing that's done on big pools of GPUs, right? But a lot of the other things involved in, say, orchestration, well, that is going to be CPU limited stuff. And what we're finding is that as tool calls and just way more things like that are basically increasing in importance, because essentially a large language model's good at doing language model things. Where it begins to become more economically useful is when that can be driving code, running a bash command, doing tool calls, right? That's kind of the glue that actually makes the next token predictor vaguely useful, at least say in the software space. So that's why the GPU to CPU mix is going to be changing. But it's not like it's a rebalancing for existing resources, it's just that as future builds happen, there will be more and more CPUs. There will still be need for GPUs. And returning to Intel, they say that they're already not meeting demand. The CFO, David Zinsser, described currently unmet demand as a number that, quote, starts with a B, so it's meaningful. Billions. It's a lot. Now, through all of that, the people who can pay the most will win, and that's because they can lock in their orders first and for the longest period. Now, PlayStation are already in that category. You see, at their last investor call, CFO Lin Tao told investors that they were set with, quote, minimum quantity necessary to manage the year-end selling season for next fiscal year. So that was her reporting some good news. Now, someone like, say, Valve, who's building a new product for kind of prestige sales from their own store, they don't necessarily have the leverage to do a Sony. That's because for as many units as the Steam Deck has sold, could be around like 4 million, that is nothing compared to what, say, Sony will be buying for a PS5 or PS6. But what's perhaps most concerning here is that, in a way, we kind of know about these problems. When I say to you that executives are openly talking about these issues, and that's likely an indicator of a problem, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that leadership who had once cut off their right arm rather than admit structural problems with their production pipelines, they're now happy to tell you that they're unable to make devices. That's quite something, because it's obviously them recognizing the problem is not one that they can brush over for, say, their shareholders. Often problems are brushed over so shareholders don't panic. Or perhaps companies will talk about their AI strategy, their NFT strategy, all that gumph, because they want to say things that won't panic investors. Now, in order to not panic shareholders, they're being a bit more open and realistic. That does quite tell you that the issue is real. And that's especially because they know they need to set expectations right with consumers. And Xbox is an example of this. You see, Xbox's Project Helix is mostly going to be a PC under the hood, even more so than the current consoles, right? And Xbox's leadership are not trying to pretend that they can work around the current market issues. Ashish Sharma, new CEO of Xbox, told GameFile, quote, memory costs will impact pricing, will limit availability. There's also some leaked Activision acquisition documents that showed that back in 2023, Xbox was preparing for a 2028 launch of Project Helix. But now leadership are openly telling the media quotes like this: we're not ready to share a launch timeline right now. The world's pretty dynamic. Yeah, dynamic's one way to put it. So they know they can't change the economy, they can't change these things. But they're not even trying to hide that fact anymore. And even a company as traditionally secretive as Valve that does not have to play to the concerns of shareholders, even they are now saying the same thing in press interviews. Partially, it's because they know that they can paint someone else as the villain here. But the reason why they need to do that is because they don't want you to blame them whenever you feel the sticker shock that they feel basically forced to give you. And Valve are doing this because seemingly they're going to need you on their side sooner rather than later. Which, if you've got the cash, might be the good news for the end of this video. Back in February, Valve gave us a hardware update. They told us that their, quote, goal of shipping all 3 products in the first half of the year has not changed. Obviously, it's not looking great. It means they've got till the end of June to get the machine and the frame out of their warehouses. And what might actually be shocking is that there's a few signs that maybe they'll manage it. Let me explain. Import tracking has showed that Valve have been taking stock of controllers in the USA for about a month before it went up on orders. And now we're seeing, over the last few weeks, similar reports suggesting that warehouses have been filling up with, quote, game consoles. Now, the way to understand that is, you see, whenever you're shipping something to another country that's not personal, like say it's for business, you've got to put down a thing called a harmonized code. And that's basically just slicing all the products in the world into like little categories. It's the sort of thing that like governments, legislators, etc. will be using to set policy, to monitor their economy, right? And it means that some things are public. You can quite literally like look up the public registers of this stuff. So we know Valve are taking shipments. Those shipments are of game consoles. So with that, it's obvious the Steam machines are coming. Valve have been able to produce at least a manufacturing run of them. They've been able to ship them to warehouses. Maybe they won't arrive in the warehouses with RAM in them, who knows? And I guess the good news is you might be able to buy one soon. But the bad news is maybe bad news you got from me. You may have seen the recent headlines about RAM prices going down. Don't take that as this crisis breaking, because it is not. The very same TrendForce report behind those numbers, it projects contract prices spiking up to 63% next quarter. The suppliers are printing money. And the consumer dip is actually a little bit different. It's consumer. It is retailers blinking on extremely high prices that nobody was paying. So it's based on that, not the actual structural problem driving this whole thing, easing up. It's literally, they're going down because retailers are trying to get rid of stock. So Valve then does not have the leverage to absorb what's coming in the way that some other large megacorps could. And that's why the only remaining questions are quantity and cost. How limited will these be in number? How much will they cost? And whenever you see the answer to that question of how much they cost, Valve are hoping that you remember that they told you in advance, because it's not the price that they will have wanted to charge you. And I think that's broadly the case for the whole games hardware industry, because basically we're all a little bit screwed right now. And the amount of money that we as a, I suppose, segment of the economy command is just not that much, as compared to the other sectors, many seem to be in high growth, that are demanding all this hardware. And if you ask me, it's more sad than anything in this, is that we're losing our gateway into gaming. Do you remember the 1050 Ti? Legendary card for its price to performance. And for so many people, that's what allowed them to get into PC gaming. What I really worry about is that now people will be getting into different kind of games that maybe don't involve owning hardware. And I think a lot of those games have worse incentives. And even worse than that, it could hasten adoption of game cloud streaming. It's not something that I'm inherently against, but I can see a troublesome, a worrying future where you don't own compute. You just rent it from a data center. That's kind of what goes on with a lot of the big frontier AI models that you can't run in your local computer. And it's probably what'll go on for many people when it comes to the GPUs that they would really like to play their games on, or the memory that they would need to run their games. It won't be your GPU, it won't be your memory, it will be in a data center, and you will be charged. And I gotta be real with you, it doesn't sound too good. Now, sometimes we get stories that really sound bad, but actually, they're more interesting when we dive into them. And the next video you can watch is on that, with the PlayStation Time Bomb. It's quite the story, it's really fun, and it's this video next.